Welcome back to the second video in our 6-part series, building the Align T-Rex 700X Dominator. We're ready to assemble the frame, which is at page 7, the first part at the top here. And you can see we're going to need parts bags 700 HB17A, 700 HB18A, 700 HB18, and 700 HB19. What I'm going to do is take all the parts bags that are in the box, I'll open them, lay them out on the bench, match everything up, and then we'll go ahead and start the video again. So give me a couple minutes and I'll be right back. Alright, working at the top of page 7, see we're going to need the main frames, the upper half. So the upper halves are in here. I'm going to open up this. Also, you're going to open up bag 700 HB19. That's going to allow you to get the 2 bearing blocks. Okay, that's these. You also need some of the items out of bag 700 HB18, and you're going to find the A bag is inside of the HB18 bag, which is in here. So I'm going to cut them up, lay the parts out right now, and then we'll come back to the video in just a second. I've opened each one of the bags, and I've laid the parts out so that the front of the helicopter is going to be here and the rear of the helicopter is going to be here as far as the frame is considered. And that way it matches up with the manual itself. The manual asks you to turn around and do a little bit of sanding right here, so I have a little bit of 1000 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to turn around and sand a little roundness into this edge right here. Right. It's good. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cut the video. I'll take each one of the screws out piece by piece, and I'll turn around and drop them in here, let them sit for a minute, clean them, take them back out, match them up with the exact part so that the screws here, so I don't have to figure out which ones go where or look back at the manual. It just makes it a lot easier. And then I'll be ready to assemble them into the frame, and we'll Loctite them. Not when I put them in the first time. I will Loctite a couple pieces. For instance, these I'll Loctite probably in place, and the reason for it is because I may have to get to them from the inside using one of the wrenches, and it just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, I've laid everything out, cleaned all the screws, turned around and cleaned the holes with the threaded parts where the screws go into, and we're ready to start the top of page 7. This is where we're going to start to assemble the frame. And one thing that I need to note is that these screws here, I'm going to set them aside because they are for holding the servos onto these brackets, the pitch and the aileron, and that's not till a few steps later. The other part that I would like you to bring to your attention is that the left-sided frame, the helicopter nose is facing to the top of the screen, and the tail is facing to the bottom of the screen or towards me. You'll see that there's a couple little threads here, and the servo mounts from the outside, so this little raised part that's a bubble threaded piece is going to be to the inside of the frame. So what I'm going to do is I'll start by putting the pieces on the frame itself. I'm going to thread them in just loose so that I'll come back and tighten them with Loctite, but I want to make sure I have everything in the right place. The middle bearing block, because there's 3 bearing blocks in this model, you have the 3rd bearing block, which is added to the frame in the second half or the bottom of page 7. So I have that sitting over to the side. This bearing block, the actual bearing is pushed in from the bottom, so it's going to go in place right here. The next bearing block, the top one, bearing faces up or towards the head of the helicopter, and it goes in place right here. The actual canopy mount goes in place here, and this one I am going to Loctite on, but I'll do it at the very end once I get the Loctite out, so I have everything on one frame for the moment. This mount goes here. The other servo mount attaches here. One thing to know is you have 3 button heads here, and this one is the socket, because it's going to attach, it's going to go through the axle support piece. The last item to go on is the for the pinion. It's going to turn around and support the pinion in the main shaft of the motor. That piece is going to go here. It does go bearing facing up, so the bearing slides in from the top. It's going to go place here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put some Loctite onto my plastic. Okay, got some Loctite, and first thing I'm going to Loctite on is the actual canopy mount. So place this over here. It's not snugged up yet because I still have to turn around and put the blocks in and the screws on the other side. Alright, so we have all the screws in. We don't have these two in yet, but that's okay. I'm not going to tighten them down anyways at this point because there's still screws up front, and if you tighten them down you can't line them up. So I'm going to leave these sitting for just a little bit. Now I'm ready to snug everything up. I'm going to take my main shaft, just drop it in. Perfect. All right. And I'll work from the front back to make sure that I snug everything up and I don't miss a screw. Okay, the upper half of the frame and all the parts are now on it. I'm going to cut the video for a second and we'll get the second half, so we'll work on the bottom half of the helicopter or lower plates and get those assembled. I have to pull a few parts. We're working on the bottom of page 7 and I've cleaned all the screws, laid everything out. It's calling for bag number 700HB11B. Inside the bag is the battery tray, the bottom plate, and the mounting screws and brackets that go to the bottom plate. So I'm going to set this aside, and I don't need the battery tray right now, so we're just going to go ahead and set this over here. Now the other part this calling for the front canopy mounting screws and the lower third bearing bracket or bearing. And so what I'm going to do first, I'm going to put on the front canopy mounts. And there's a nice hole right here, so you can insert a metal rod and just snug it down. It doesn't have to be, don't over force it, it's on plastic. It's very strong plastic. There's no reason to over force this or over tighten it. The Loctite's going to dry and keep it in place. Now I'm going to install the mounting brackets here on the middle. You'll notice that the outer screws are all the same length, they're small. Then the inner screws for the center ones that go here, they're small too, because these two right here, screws, and these two are going to hold the landing skids to the bottom of the helicopter, and that's in the next step on the next page. So let's go ahead and put these in place. And again, I'm just putting them in place because I still have to put screws on the outside of the frame. I want to be able to move them a little bit, then I'll snug them down after the frame is attached. Now snug these in place, tighten, and I'll do the same here, tighten them up. Now we have the back. and tighten them up. Here's the idea, is the lower half mounts onto the top half. That way if you're in a crash and something does happen, a lot of times in the previous model, you ended up cracking the frame and you had to throw away everything and get a new frame. Now there are two halves to the frame. The top's a little bit smaller, the bottom's a little wider that fits the battery, and if something does happen, you might damage the bottom half of the frame, usually before you damage the upper half, because it's reinforced with brackets and everything else, and so it stays pretty sturdy. But if you do have to replace something, you're only now replacing half of the frame rather than the whole side piece. So that's a nice new feature in this helicopter. I'm going to go ahead and install the third bracket. Bearing bracket. And the bearing goes in from the top. And I will tighten them after I put on the other side. And I'll snug those up. And we'll put on the bottom. Okay, we have the bottom plate on. Still have the two screws here, which are for the boom braces. I'm going to set these to the side. And we have the 4 screws here, which are going to attach the landing skids. And I'm going to set them over to the side. Alright, there's the main frame. We're finished with step number 7, the bottom of 7. We're going to go ahead and turn the page to 8. We're on page 8 of the manual, and we're assembling the skids in the front of the helicopter where all electronics go, and a couple other parts that are on here. The manual itself shows that the actual piece here, which holds all electronics, is in pieces. It's not it came fully packaged in my pack. It will come apart, but you have the easy release battery holder here. So that's done. The next is the skids themselves, and you can see that they're different heights from the ground. So the shorter skid goes in the front and the longer skid goes in the back, so they are two heights. You have the skids themselves. The little end caps here are not in place when you receive the model. What I do is I use a little bit of JB Weld. I got tired of using epoxy because they pop off. JB Weld, they never pop off unless you're in a really bad crash. And you just put a little bit on the inside and put a little bit around the ball itself or the little cap, slide it into place, wipe off the excess, and it'll turn around and dry. And the JB Weld fills any gaps. If it's too tight when you slide it in, then you can turn around and sand just a little bit of the plastic off so that it slips in very easily, because the JB Weld will fill the gap and they're not going to come off. So I've pre-done that. You have the 4 screws, which was from the previous page 7. And so they've been cleaned. We now have the washers, the set screws, and the grommets or rubber stoppers that can go on the skid pipes. The 4 little screws, what a lot of people do is they don't have a lot of several of these laying around, and sometimes they get in a crash or they lose them. You can just put 2 in, so that way it'll hold the skid maybe in the front or the back from pivoting. If you have extras, then you don't have to worry about it. But that way you have a couple spares in case something happens, you break off one of the skids, you want to replace it, and you don't have an extra one. These right here are for the canopy. They keep the canopy soft against the frame, or actually away from the frame, and they're going to go right in here in place and also hold this into place. And then these just snap onto the surface. One thing that I did notice in the manual is that it calls for 12 millimeter self-tapping screws, and I haven't found the 12 millimeter self-tapping screws. These are the screws that I'm going to use, which are out, and they're a little bit shorter, but they're going to be fine. They're not going to really hold anything in place or the frame, because you have the main bracket here as far as support coming down, and this is going to bolt on, and it's going to also bolt right into the motor mount, and that's going to keep everything in place. And these 2 small screws right here are not going to make a difference in the kit, whether they're 12 millimeters or the length that they included in my package. So I'm going to go ahead and put the stuff together, and we're going to start right now. And the first thing I'm going to do is drop the skids on the bottom of the helicopter. I have both the screws in. They're loose. I'll tighten them up in a second. And as you can see, the skids are going to pitch to the front side of the helicopter, the front being here, tail being here. I'm going to snug these into place and actually just tighten them all the way down. There we have it. I'll put the skid pipes on later, and I just do that because I don't need the pieces here. We're gonna still have the tail to do, and put all electronics on. And so I usually put these on later. So I'm gonna set these aside with the 4 little set screws. And these. Now we're going to insert the front. It snaps right into place. And I haven't snugged them up. I'll snug them up as soon as I insert the 2 screws here. Now we're going to put the 2 screws in each side of the frame, and then we'll tighten down the canopy bumpers. Okay, those 2 are snug. Do the other side. Both those are snug. Come back and put these in. And you don't want to over tighten them. They're going to plastic, and it's going to get pinched here. Once I put the motor mount in, then I'll check these to see if I can snug them up a little bit more. What I don't want to do is, as I said, over tighten them. You can put the little bumpers on. Snap right into place. All right, we're finished with page 8, except for a couple things. And there are items that I want to do at a later time. I do not want to put on the side support brackets because there's a screw here that goes in, and as I said earlier, the actual piece, once you tighten it down, you got to get it just in place. But if I'm a little bit off, it's here or it's there, and if I need to move it or shift it for the motor mount, once this is screwed down tight and Loctited, I got to break it. There's no reason to do that. So I'll put this on when I put the actual motor mount in place. The other item that I haven't done is I have not put the skids on, and the reason is, one, they're drying with the JB Weld, and they'll be okay overnight, and then it'll be cured. But I usually put the skids on as the last thing that I do, and just that's my habit of doing that. So we're done with page 8. We're going to go to page 9, and that'll be in the next video. So we've just completed build video 2 of 6, and the electronics is going to be in the 3rd video. Thank you very much for watching.